You're watching 12 WKRC TV, a new generation of news. 12 Newsmakers starts now.
Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. On March 7th, the Republican and Democratic presidential contest will draw the most attention. But the impact of term limits on the state level has begun to sweep longtime incumbents from safe seats in Columbus. Traditionally, the local Republican Party has anticipated and filled open positions with little controversy. But this year, the sudden wealth of openings created not just an embarrassment of potential candidates, but reopened old ideological splits inside the party. When the smoke cleared, the party chairman, Buck Niehoff, felt compelled to resign and was replaced by State Treasurer Joe Deters. And three party-endorsed candidates found themselves with a primary challenge from the right wing of the party. It is impossible to invite the candidates of all three races to be guests. As a way of illustrating the underlying issues, however, I have decided to focus on the most intense and highest profile race. If you live on the east side, you have undoubtedly seen the intense sign campaigns for Steve Adams and Tom Brinkman, two Republican candidates scrapping over who will replace Jacqueline O'Brien in the 37th Ohio District. That district occupies the southeast corner of Hamilton County and includes the Cincinnati city neighborhoods of Hyde Park, Mount Lookout, Mount Washington, Oakley, O'Brienville, and Columbia Tusculum, as well as the cities of Norwood and Newtown and Anderson Township. Whoever wins the Republican nomination in the primary will face Democratic candidate Les Mann this November. I have invited both Republican candidates to join me this morning because the Republican Party leadership refused to let Steve Adams appear with his opponent. I have had to split the two interviews. First, Tom Brinkman. Mr. Brinkman is a longtime local Republican activist who has led numerous fights against school levies, the communications levy, and the proposed entertainment tax as the head of COAST, the coalition opposed to additional spending and taxes. Professionally, Mr. Brinkman has been a longtime owner of Metro Web, a printing company located in northern Kentucky. The family business was recently sold, but he's still a printer. Tom, welcome back to Newsmakers.
Thank you very much for having me.
On various issues that we just mentioned.
Right.
Tom, underneath all of the things, and there's lots of rhetoric in any campaign,
Sure.
Lots of issues come up. What is the essential issue? What's the underlying issue for you in this campaign? Why you're challenging the party-endorsed candidate?
The number one issue for me is the out-of-control growth of our state government. I have a chart here that shows that our state government is growing, taxing and spending at twice the rate of inflation. The rate of inflation line, as you can see, is right along here. And
Okay. We're looking at
from
something
89
so basically a decade.
A decade.
Okay.
But as you can see down here, in the early years, when we had a Republican governor and a Democrat state house, they ran very close to the rate of inflation, which was good.
All right.
But since the Republicans have taken over in '94, they've lost their Republican roots, gotten away from fiscal conservative, and are taxing and spending at twice the rate of inflation.
And during this period, by the way, there have been lots of people who've said, why didn't the governor, Voinovich, and now Taft, but Voinovich, pull back that tax, roll it back? What is the reason from your perspective? Why don't we put that down and we can just talk again?
I don't know. And that's why I want to go up to Columbus and try to make a difference. We currently have a $1.2 billion surplus. And my fear is that we grow government, that additional $1.2 billion, and if next year the revenues don't come in to support it, they're either going to have to raise taxes or cut programs. I think the rate of inflation is a much better barometer at growing government so that it stays at that rate and can provide for all the citizens.
You're a longtime Republican. Both
Yes.
you and your opponent are Republicans, and
Yes.
that's the nature of a primary race.
Yes.
Why are you an anti-tax Republican, and are you saying Steve Adams won't be? He'll be on here to speak for himself in the second half. Are you saying he won't be an anti-tax Republican?
Well, what I see is it's really a split between the two wings of the Republican Party, the Main Street Republicans and the Wall Street Republicans. I feel much more comfortable the Main Street, fiscally responsible, lower on taxes, less regulations, socially conservative. I think Steve is more with the establishment. Go along to get along. I know that he claims he's anti-tax, but quite honestly, I've been involved in the anti-tax movement in this county for 10 years, and I haven't seen him around. And so it's one thing to say you're anti-tax, it's one thing to say you're pro-life, it's another to really stand up hard on the issues.
On the anti-tax question, you want to roll back the taxes on the state level. I don't know if you want to reduce or just control that rainy day fund. Where's it going to come out of? Something has to be rolled back, and try to be concrete. Don't just give me the nice things about waste.
Currently we have a $1.2 billion surplus, so it's not allocated or spent anywhere. So we collect $6.9 billion in income tax.
Right.
If we rolled it back 1 year, $1 billion, so that we only collect 5.9, we essentially eliminate the surplus and give it back to the public. So,
are you calling for elimination of the surplus in the state budget?
Yes, to roll back $1 billion of the $1.2 billion.
And you would take that out of the existing surplus, or would you take that out of services that have been created?
Not out of services.
So you wouldn't change the structure of state government? You wouldn't eliminate downsize offices?
No, I'm not looking to downsize offices. Now, I think we can make some offices more efficient.
Yeah, everybody talks about that. Okay.
And get rid of some mandates. But no, all I'm looking at is saying they have a surplus. Let's get it returned to the public before they spend it.
Okay. The other side of this is, and you know better than I do, there is this ongoing debate about what are we going to do to properly, constitutionally fund the schools. Now, on a local level, you have been the point person opposing lots of school levies.
Right.
On this show, you say you always vote against school levies.
Right.
Absolutely. You vote against all levies, I think, but you certainly vote against all school levies. If you were elected, you would then be an officer of the state of Ohio with constitutional responsibility for the public school system.
Yes.
And we don't even know what the courts are going to say. What are you going to do to fund the school system?
The first thing I would do is introduce a constitutional amendment to the state constitution to vacate the DeRoff decision, because currently we have lost control of the funding mechanism of our schools. It's really in the hands of the court. Any great idea that we come up with in the legislature still has to go through court approval. I think the citizens would vote to put that authority directly in the hands of the legislature, and that's what I would propose doing.
Even if that happened, that's way down the road. Let's say the court comes back and says, you know, the state, despite increasing the amount of money the state's going to spend on repairing buildings and on the per pupil costs and all of that, isn't enough. You're now in the state legislature. Are you going to be responsive in the area of school funding to the court's decision? Will you take that money that maybe is in that surplus right now and put it into schools?
The answer to that would be no, because I think we need to fundamentally change with the constitutional amendment who controls the school system. I think we need to get away from the property tax and the burden it places on people and spread it. Michigan had a great idea on how they changed the fundamental structure of funding of education, but right now, as long as the courts are overseeing it, there's no way they change it.
As always, I'm aware of time, so I want to make sure. Let me ask even a further question. That's one constitutional amendment. Do you, in fact, if you were elected, do you support the concept of public schools, or down the road, would you try to somehow undermine the idea that Ohio should be supporting public schools or have public schools?
No, I completely support public schools. I believe in the universal public education. I believe everyone should have a choice on what schools they go to. I support charter schools. I support good school districts. And it's really interesting in this race, we have a great school district with the Forest Hills School District that gets penalized from state funding because they're doing a great job. And we get to Cincinnati public schools, it's just a cash hog where we just throw money down the drain.
Okay, so I just want to get that principle clear.
Yes, definitely.
On your website, which is Brinkman 2000, www.brinkman2000,
Yes.
right, .com, you say, I am the sole candidate in its 37th district, since there's only one other, Steve Adams, that has been in support of the Unity Home Life Amendment on Roe versus Wade. You're the only one that supports the Unity Home Life Amendment in its entirety. What is it, and why are you the only one who supports it?
Well, what I believe in is I'm a no exceptions person on abortion. I think that what we have done is we have, on a scale of 1 to 10, Ohio's on a 2. And we need to move and cut down on the amount of abortions. And I will do that in any
What exceptions would you eliminate?
I am a no exceptions candidate.
So health, the life of the mother,
Right.
no exception.
No exceptions.
Rape,
No exceptions.
no exception.
No exceptions.
Incest,
It's not
no
the baby's
exception.
fault. But I think we can move down the scale.
Okay.
Right now, in 1990, we had 38,000 abortions in this state. We now have the same amount. We've done nothing to cut down on it. And I think there's a great ideas we can move down.
I have less than 30 seconds. I got one more question.
Sure.
You're opposing the Republican leadership in Hamilton County, which is key to the state leadership. If you're elected, will you be isolated once you get to Columbus, or can you get along with these guys?
Absolutely not. There are 50 new people going up to Columbus. It's going to be a great time for new people to get in there. That's over 2/5 of the legislature. It'll be a great time, and a lot of people come together and work real hard for the state.
Tom, thank you very much. We'll see you the night of March the 7th, I hope, at the Board of Elections.
Thank you.
Stay tuned. After the break, I'll be joined by Steve Adams, Mr. Brinkman's opponent. And in the last 5 minutes of the program this morning, we will help you figure out what you can do if you want to vote in the Republican or Democratic primary, but have always thought of yourself as an independent or a member of the opposite party. Welcome back. I am now joined by Steve Adams, the candidate endorsed by the Republican Party in the 37th House District. Mr. Adams currently works as the Southwest Ohio Regional Representative for the Ohio State Treasurer, Joe Dieters, who is also the president of the local Republican Party. Mr. Adams is a former assistant Hamilton County prosecutor and is a 3-time Ironman World Championship triathlete, and I'm not running against him. Steve, welcome to Newsmakers.
Hi, thanks for having me here today.
Steve, there's lots of issues that come up in a political campaign. For you, what are the essential issues? What is the one thing that has moved you to run for political office? And if I understand correctly, this is your first run, right?
Yes.
What is it that drives you?
My primary focus is going to be on education. I've served as an assistant Hamilton County prosecutor under Joe Dieters for almost 8 years, and obviously in those confines you see the education breakdown, or at least I have, very significantly. And along with that, obviously safety issues are going to be a concern of mine, because I feel as a former prosecutor I can go into the state legislature with very great experience in reviewing and initiating criminal laws. But education, when I go door to door and talk to people and find out what they really feel is important to them and their community, it's education. Not only right now in Cincinnati, there's certainly a problem with the public schools. They are improving, however, and that's good. But even in Forest Hill School District in Anderson, which is an exemplary school district, those teachers, those administrators, and those board people have the same concerns as the Cincinnati public schools have. They're just blessed with different socioeconomic
Settings, okay.
right.
When you say education is your top priority, concretely, what is it that you would like to see the state do, especially in the light of the fact that we're working through in the courts this whole question of the proper role of state funding for local? Concretely now, what would you want to see the state do if you got there?
I really feel, after talking to the teachers, the administrators, and the board members and children, state mandates, and particularly state unfunded mandates, are a big problem. They confine and limit the freedom that the teachers, the parents want in their own educational setting, to bring more local control to schools. Now out there you hear about vouchers and charter schools and programs like that, and that's fine. I believe I support them. It creates a competitive atmosphere, but at the same time, I believe public schools can be very competitive as well, and I want to help them to be in a competitive atmosphere and help them improve. I'm not going to give up on public schools.
Does that mean, concretely, spending more money?
No. more money does not necessarily mean better academic performance
So
from
what's
students.
it mean? Just trying to reduce these state mandates, unfunded mandates?
No, I think a lot of it has to do with, there's certainly a difference between urban schools and suburban schools.
Right.
And I feel that given socioeconomic problems, parenting problems, and things that I've experienced on a daily basis in the prosecutor's office, I think that money helps give a child in a poor environment the opportunity to receive an adequate education.
So what we're talking about is making sure that the formula for funding in urban schools recognizes the problems they face versus the suburban schools. So urban schools would get more funding per child than suburban schools. Is that what we're saying from the state?
Yes.
Now, one of the issues of your opponent is he's calling for a tax rollback that would eliminate the huge $1.2 billion state surplus in the budget. What's your policy on tax rollbacks or tax rebates, or however we might want to think about that?
Well, I understand the surplus. In fact, I hear it's more than $1 billion. Approaching 2001, I understand the state will have a $3 billion surplus. And I certainly think that that money needs to somehow get back to the taxpayer.
Concretely, how might that happen?
Well, if they can think of, education obviously is a key, but now you have the tobacco money settlement, which is going to produce $4.5 billion up to the year 2025, $2 billion until the year 2012. I think that's going to make a significant impact. You also have the lottery. That provides money for the schools. But right now, for example, the Cincinnati school.
But what about, so there's going to be this $3 billion. You're saying let's use that, or are you saying let's eliminate that? Are we eliminating it by spending it for the schools? Is that what you're saying? We've got to have that surplus in order, when the court comes in with its ruling, that we have it to invest in the schools? Is that what, I'm trying to figure out where you are on taxes now. I hear what you're saying on schools. You've got a value there. But what are you saying about taxes?
I'm as anti-tax as anybody is. I think the thing where I come in is using your reason and common sense, making sure that government spend its dollars wisely. If they're not going to get the money. And I think that as a collective group in the legislature, particularly given that there's about 44 new seats available in the State House, I think that those are going to be big issues that are going to be dealt with.
Okay, moving on, because I'm aware of time. Your opponent says that you are not sufficiently anti-abortion. Where do you stand on abortion?
I'm pro-life. Always have been pro-life, and I always will be pro-life. The distinction between Tom and I is he absolutely has no exceptions to abortion. As gut-wrenching as it is to think about rape and incest, I still believe that that's a life and that should be preserved. It's a difficult issue and it's a struggle, but that's where I have to come down on it.
Wait a minute, I want to be clear. Are you saying that a victim of rape or incest should be allowed to have an abortion or should not be allowed to have an abortion?
Should not, because I really believe that that child should not have.
Okay. So you would eliminate those as options?
That's correct.
Okay.
The only exception that I would have is the life of the mother, and the doctor or the physician should do everything possible to save both the life of the mother and the child. But if you have to make a choice...
Okay, so that's your one exception that you would make, the
life of the mother should be saved, okay. Absolutely.
Now, and I'm very aware of time, one of the concerns is there's all these new voters, all these new seats that are going to be open. You said 44. All these new representatives are going to be there next year. One of the concerns might be that you're the endorsed candidate, you're young, you're from Dieter's district, you're from Taft's area. Are you going to be independent enough to make your own judgments?
Absolutely. I wouldn't be in this position right now if people didn't think I was a hard, tireless fighter for the community, a hard worker. And you mentioned some of my resume. You don't get there without being an independent hard-working, disciplined fighter, and that's exactly what I will be. I think that I can give the community a very disciplined, focused attitude towards issues and fight for their causes.
Okay, Steve, stay right there, but I want to do something here and we'll come back.
Thank you.
I want to take the last 5 minutes to address a confusing question that many people have called the newsroom about in the last week. In the South Carolina and Michigan Republican primaries, we heard lots of talk about the many independents and Democrats who crossed over to vote in those Republican primaries. What options do Ohio voters have on March the 7th? Here's a little Sunday morning poli-sci lesson. When Ohioans register to vote, they fill out this form. It is hard to see all the details, but take my word for it, the form never asks the new voter to declare a party affiliation. In effect, all voters start as independents in Ohio. Each time you vote in any election, the Board of Elections records your participation, which is published for every precinct on voter history reports like this one for Precinct A in the 1st Ward of Cincinnati. When you vote in a general election like this November, when voters choose between a Democratic and Republican candidate and the winner assumes the office, only the voter's participation is noted. This is a secret ballot. No one knows how many Republicans or how many Democrats or how many third-party candidates any voter selected in a general election. But primaries are different. Americans created the primary election format as a reform measure in the early 20th century to give rank-and-file party members a way to break the power of the party bosses. In their purest form, primaries are elections in which members of a particular political party select the candidate they want to represent them in the general election. When a voter shows up at the polls for a primary, they have several choices. If a first-time voter or a long-time independent asks for a Democratic or a Republican ballot, that voter gets a D or an R recorded behind their name, and they become a member of that party. It's that simple. A third option is to vote during a primary election but ask for the issues ballot. For example, you can vote for the local school levy or street improvement bond issue in March, but not vote in either of the two parties' primaries. No candidate name will appear on your issues ballot. In that case, an I is placed in the records, and the voter remains an independent. So when you check the voting history, this is what it might look like. The ballot requested by each voter in a primary shows up. So for one person, you can see an R. I know you can't see it very well, but another person you can see a D, another person you can see an I. This is what candidates and political managers can see. So, where are we? What if this is your first time to vote or who never have taken a party ballot in past elections? You are an independent. You can do anything you want on March 7th. You can ask for a Republican, a Democratic, or issues ballot, no questions asked. Your choice will simply be recorded. But what if you have always voted in the Democratic Party's primaries and think of yourself as a Democrat, but want to vote in the Republican Bush versus McCain race? Or you are a Republican, 6'10", play basketball every Tuesday night at the Y, and want to vote for your hero, Bill Bradley, in the Democratic race. In either case, you can go to the polling place on March the 7th and ask for a ballot that you want. In all likelihood, the poll workers will simply hand it to you and you go into the booth and vote. But a party judge may challenge you. My friend and neighbor, who is a Republican precinct executive, knows I have always taken a Democratic ballot. If I came in and asked for a Republican ballot out of the clear blue, Jim may challenge me. In fact, I'd be disappointed if he didn't. Even if he does, here's what will happen. I will be offered what is called a 10W form and asked to fill it out and sign. The key sentence reads, I desire to be affiliated with the Republican or Democratic Party and support the principles of that party and wish to cast a ballot in the party's primary this year. Falsification of this form is a 5th-degree felony and carries a potential 6 to 12-month jail term. Since American political parties are not based on principle, based like those that exist in Europe in the parliamentary systems, this is obviously difficult law to enforce. On the other hand, as someone, myself, I'm speaking for myself now, who cherishes the political process, crossing over to skew the other party's primary results is more than a violation of the law. It's a betrayal of our best selves. But remember, The vast, vast majority of you are not officially members of any party. You're independents in Hamilton County. In Hamilton County, the stronghold of the Republican Party, approximately 561,000 residents are registered voters. About 54,800 of those are Republicans, 32,000 Democrats, and 519 Reform Party members. The rest of you, 473,000, are independents, and you can do anything you want on March 7th. Whew! I'm out of breath, and yes, there will be a quiz at the beginning of next week's show. Seriously, thanks for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. And next week, Todd Portune, Marilyn Highland, the candidates for the Democratic primary for the Hamilton County Commission. Have a good week.